Good evening, my name's Lisa Townsend, I'm your Police and Crime Commissioner. Thank you for joining us at the latest of our Policing Your Community online events. This evening we are policing Tandridge. Thank you so much for those of you who were able to join us in person. We were in Lingfield back in November. I'm joined here this evening by our Chief Constable, Tim Meyer, and your Borough Commander, Inspector Lindsay Watley. They're both going to talk shortly about their plans for Tim for the county and Lindsay for Tandridge in particular. But before we do, I'm just going to say a few words about what we've been doing. So you're going to hear from all three of us about local issues, and we do want to answer as many of your questions as possible. So if you do have a question, please pop it into the comments box either on Facebook or on YouTube, and I will get to as many of them as possible. So as your Police and Crime Commissioner, it is my job to hold the Chief Constable to account for the service that you receive as residents from the police. And it's a really important time for policing across our county, thanks to the extra work that Surrey Police have been doing to recruit our share of the government's 20,000 extra officers as part of Uplift, and thanks in particular to your council tax contributions over the years. Surrey Police has grown by 395 officers. Now, that makes Surrey Police the biggest it's ever been. It does mean also that we have a younger workforce than ever before. So it's going to take time to get those officers fully trained up and out and about in our communities and across Tandridge, which I know is where we all want to see them. As well as holding the force to account, it's also my duty to produce a police and crime plan, and that sets the direction for the force. The key priorities within the plan are protecting people from harm, working with residents so that they feel safe, preventing violence against women and girls, ensuring safer Surrey roads, and strengthening the relationship between Surrey Police and its residents, which is why these meetings are so important, to give you an opportunity to hear directly from the force and to ask your questions. In the last year, my office has awarded over £5 million to local organisations to support preventing violence against women and girls. We've also been working actively with the force to improve the service that you receive around antisocial behaviour, and also the response that you get when you call 101, which is our non-emergency number. On a national level, I've been working on transport safety, but also on mental health within policing, and in particular the response that police provide to those experiencing a mental health crisis. And I know that's something that the Chief Constable has been leading on in Surrey and will talk about briefly as well. Surrey Police is an absolutely fantastic organisation, but the demand on its services has never been greater. As Commissioner, I oversee the budget and the assets, and that includes setting the amount of council tax that you pay towards policing. I have to balance the cost pressures that we are all facing with my goal to provide the Chief Constable with the resources that he needs in order to maintain the service that you receive. And in some areas, I know that both the Chief Constable and I want to improve that. It does mean finding an extra 17 to 20 million pounds over the next 4 to 5 years in savings, and that's something that we're working very closely on as well. Now, times are tough, and asking anybody to provide more money is a really, really difficult thing to do. But it is one of the most difficult tasks, but it's also very important. The Chief Constable is going to talk to you shortly about his plan and his vision, and that concentrates on what policing does best, which is fighting crime in our local communities and protecting people. And that's exactly what you tell us you want to see the force doing. I believe that the Chief Constable's plan is going to significantly boost the service that we all receive across our communities. But in order to achieve it, we have to maintain an appropriate level of funding. And that's why I have to think very carefully about making prudent and long-term financial plans. If you haven't done so already, I would like to invite you to complete the Council Tax Survey. It's currently live. It's going to be running until the end of this month. You can find the link in the comments box on both YouTube and Facebook, wherever you're watching. It's also on my office's website and across our social media feeds as well. Please do take a few minutes. It will take you less than 5 minutes to fill it out, and your views are so important to me. Now, the survey asks you to consider whether you would support a £13 a year rise, which is the amount that the government is asking PCCs to raise council tax by this year, £10, £11 or £12 a year, or a figure under £10. Now, the Chief Constable has been very clear with me that an increase of below £10, and that's on an average Band D property, would mean further savings having to be found by Surrey Police. An increase of between 10 and 13 would mean that Surrey Police will be able to keep pace with inflation and keep any cuts to staff to a minimum. And the maximum of 13 would provide the Chief Constable with more of the resources that he needs in order to achieve his plan. Although Surrey Police will still need to find £17 million of savings in coming years. It's important, of course, that we make every efficiency that we can in the force, and that's why we're undergoing a transformation programme. My office is working very closely with the Chief Constable and his team on that, and we want to make sure that we are always providing the best value for money to you, our residents. Your contributions through councillor tax make an enormous difference to the force. For every £1 of precept that is set, Surrey Police receives an extra £500,000 towards its budget. It's not a task I take lightly, and that again is why I would like your views. So the majority who took part in our poll last year voted for the maximum increase to support our policing teams, and I want to know whether this is something that people would be prepared to do again this year. You can scan the QR code that will shortly pop up on your screen. There it is, and that will take you straight to our survey. I am now going to hand over to the Chief Constable and then the Borough Commander, who will talk you through their plans for Tandridge.
Thank you, Police and Crime Commissioner, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to talk for 10 minutes or so about my plan, which speaks to fighting crime and protecting people, striving to earn your trust and confidence, and ensuring that we are here for you when you need us. And there are 10 essential elements to this. The first is to prevent crime and to solve problems. And Surrey has a pretty good track record in crime prevention and problem solving, established long before my arrival and rightly acknowledged by the Inspectorate, and also the subject of some awards. And we need now really to take this way of thinking and apply it to some of the most pressing problems facing the community and policing. And uppermost among these is surely violence against women and girls, in respect of which there's been a great deal of concern in recent years. There are three essential elements to this that I want to talk about this evening. The first is domestic abuse. Domestic abuse very often features the most vulnerable people and the most dangerous together behind closed doors, and therefore is an extremely risky crime. Officers and staff understand that in responding to the many cases of domestic abuse, which unfortunately they must attend, they are in the business of preventing homicide and serious violence. It is absolutely vital that they make use of all of their policing powers, whether in respect of arrest, investigation, or the subsequent protection of the victim. We're already, I'm pleased to say, seeing our rate of arrest for domestic abuse increase significantly, and with that the rate of people charged with offences. We need also to improve our response in respect of sexual offences and rape. There has rightly been concern in respect of the low number of charges, the low levels of reporting, the high rates of people dropping out of the system, and ultimately the low rates of conviction. Surrey Police, I'm pleased to say, last summer committed to adopting the principles of Operation Soteria, which is a national initiative which really seeks to improve the service given to victims, the way in which investigations focus on suspects, the understanding of particular contexts in rape and sexual offences, and dispels certain myths which have inhibited rape and sexual offence prosecution in the past. And we need also to think about how to improve the safety and sense of safety for women and girls in our public spaces. And I'm pleased that in recent months we've been trialling Operation Shield, which borrows some well-established practice from other police forces and makes use of officers highly trained in behavioural detection to identify people out and about on our nighttime economies who have no legitimate purpose for being there, and instead are there only to target vulnerable people and to prey on them. And I'm pleased that we've been able to identify some people of concern in recent months and deal with those before they could cause any harm. We need to investigate crime thoroughly, a rather obvious point, you might imagine. But Surrey, I'm afraid to say, at the moment is not where we would wish to be in respect of catching and charging criminals. There will be occasions, of course, where in more modest offences, where there's an admission from the suspect and the victim is content that a caution or some similar disposal applies. But in a great many cases, we need to improve at bringing people to justice. That means following reasonable lines of inquiry, whether it's an identified suspect, the hunt for witnesses through house-to-house inquiries, the use of new lines of inquiry made available through doorbell footage, for example. One could go on, but we need really to make sure that we're following lines of inquiry up that you give us and that we can identify through our own expertise, because an investigation presents an opportunity not only to protect that victim now and see if the suspect is caught, convicted, imprisoned or rehabilitated, but also to protect future victims from the same offender. And we're seeing, I'm pleased to say, improvements in our charge rate in recent months, notably in offences such as shoplifting, which have been somewhat trivialised in the past, but shoplifting is no trivial matter. We understand that if you're a shop worker working shifts for a modest wage, the very last thing you want is to be in fear because of multiple thefts from your store. And it's an insult to those who pay for their goods with the money that they are looking after as carefully as they possibly can when others aren't doing the same. So we've seen our arrests and our charges increase, and we've seen shops and officers really engaging very well in respect of how we can get the evidence that we need to bring offenders to justice. I want to ensure that we are a potent force which pursues criminals relentlessly. That means making arrests when suspects have been identified before they can harm again. It means pursuing people who have in some way fled the justice system, and it means making the full use of the powers made available to us, for example in respect of the seizure and confiscation of criminal finance, which is such a powerful motivating force in organised crime, and which, if we take it out of the system, can really serve to disrupt and dismantle organised crime groups. We must provide outstanding victim and witness care, very often in the types of crime that we have to deal with now, and rightly deal with conscientiously: domestic abuse, child abuse, stalking, harassment, modern slavery. The victim is also the only witness. We depend on their evidence not only to keep them safe, but to protect future victims, and that's why our care and support of victims who call for our service is absolutely vital. We want to have the trust and confidence of all our communities, because we know that we rely on your trust in order to get your cooperation, and therefore the material, the evidence, the intelligence that we can act on and make sense of to use our powers and keep you safe. But we can't reasonably expect the public to trust the police if the police don't exhibit good, high standards of behaviour. You'll be all too aware of the instances of serious misconduct which unfortunately have been seen in other police forces in recent years. There have been cases in Surrey which we've dealt with robustly and will continue to do so, and I'm not at all complacent about the risk of such offending in Surrey. Mercifully, it's extremely rare, and when we do come across a gross misconduct, it is more often than not as a consequence of being reported by fellow officers and staff, which is heartening, as it shows that officers are determined themselves to stand up against bad behaviour. But we must have exemplary standards of vetting, of re-vetting and investigation, and also strive to our own high standards in respect of etiquette service and appearance. I want our police service to reflect the communities who we serve. We need your consent to police you effectively in this country, and it's right that our police force should be representative of the community whose consent we are seeking. But I don't pursue that simply in the name of statistics. It's because we need the talents and abilities of every last corner of the community in order to attract the best potential investigators, community officers, communication specialists, forensic specialists, finance experts. One could go on to ensure that we have the best performing organisation to serve you, fight crime and protect people. And I want this to be a workforce where people feel not only that they are included, but that they positively belong and they realise their potential here. And that's why our plan is focusing particularly on race and the representation and progress of women in the organisation. There are many other protected characteristics which we also need to address, but those are two particular areas that we're going to be focusing on rightly. We must, of course, work productively and spend public money wisely. The Police and Crime Commissioner has spoken already about the challenge we face in respect of the need to make savings. Surrey Police is no different from any organisation. We're subject to the same economic pressures, such as rises in inflation or interest rates. We need to make sure that we are managing our contracts well, that we're managing our systems, our processes, our technology in such a way that there is the least possible waste in the system, so that every last pound earned by the taxpayer, given to us through local or central taxation, which could have gone elsewhere, but has been entrusted to the police, is being spent to the greatest possible public value on the services that you need to protect you and fellow members of the community. We need to make savings, whatever is forthcoming in council tax. And that means having a small team who are constantly thinking about how, through improvements in the way we do things, our processes, our collaboration with other forces and authorities, we can find the savings we need to ensure that we don't lose any of the vital people on who you depend. We need to be here for you when you need us. Policing is in this respect quite simple. We answer the phone swiftly, we respond quickly. You get a polite and comprehensive service from the call handler and the initial officer who attends, who follows up the lines of inquiry that you and they identify, makes arrests where they need to be made and brings people to justice. The Inspectorate rightly identified concerns in respect of our call handling and our initial service to the public. You'll be reassured, I hope, to know that we'd already identified these areas for improvement ourselves and are making dramatic improvements in respect of the speed and quality of our 999 and 101 services. But it's important that we create capacity in the call handling and response system better to serve you. And far too often in recent years, police officers on whom you rely to respond to your burglary or antisocial behaviour, drug dealing, sexual offences or domestic abuse cases are instead occupied with dealing with people in mental health crisis. And I don't in any respect minimise the importance of ensuring that the very best care is provided to people in those situations. But that care is very seldom best delivered by a police officer who doesn't have the expertise, experience and training which the person in crisis needs, and instead has experience in investigation and coercive powers which need instead to be dedicated to policing. I'm pleased therefore that we are working hard with local partners in mental health, other health services, the ambulance service and the local authorities to deliver the right care, right person scheme, which will ensure that whilst of course the police still provide response in those extreme cases where there's a real and immediate risk to someone's safety, that it's those partners who are providing that care in the great majority of cases, and that hours and hours of police capacity are freed up to deal with those things which only we can, fighting crime and protecting people. We need to be resilient and prepared in order to serve you and whatever the world throws at us, whether that's another pandemic, a protest, a large event such as the Epsom Derby, or any other such major incident which we might not have thought of. That's why we in Surrey Police are constantly thinking about the sorts of challenges which might be thrown at our officers within the county, or with which we might need to assist elsewhere, and ensuring that from protest to major event to cyber attack, we're ready to provide the service which is required. And finally, policing is a tough old business for our police staff and our police officers. I must emphasise that police staff are doing vital operational roles, whether in respect to call handling, communication. The service is critical to gathering and presenting forensic evidence. One could go on. Our police staff are absolutely vital, working alongside officers with their powers. It's a tough business. They need to be brave. They need to run to things which most people would sensibly run from. They see more things in most weeks than many mercifully see in a lifetime. And they do jobs which most people would not or could not do. And it's important, therefore, that we acknowledge that and we look after them. When we meet the parents and families of new officers at the passing out parades, of which we've seen a great many recently because we've recruited so many new officers, I and senior colleagues feel a sense of obligation to those families to look after the people that they've entrusted to us to look after you. And that means ensuring that their caseloads are well managed, that they're not having to deal with unnecessary levels of stress over and above putting themselves at risk to look after the public, and that they're well rested, well fed, exercised, and therefore as fit and healthy as they can possibly be in order to be the people who you need to protect you, your families and those in the community. That's why we're determined to make sure that our workforce is as fit and healthy and safe as they can be. And with that, I'll hand over to Lindsay, the Borough Commander.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. Thought I'd start off with giving you an update as what the team looks like within Tandridge. Within Tandridge, we've got the Safer Neighbourhood team who I manage. I've got two sergeants, one who covers the north of Tandridge, one who covers the south of Tandridge. And then we've got 4 PCs, 6 PCSOs, one of whom's a specialist in rural crime. And we also have 2 youth engagement officers who work with partners and the schools, ensure and liaising with young people and their families. Alongside that, there are multiple other teams that work across Tandridge. 24 hours a day, there is a neighbourhood policing team responding to calls. Also 24 hours a day, we have a detective capability in terms of criminal investigation. Supporting the neighbourhood team, we have an antisocial behaviour specialist, we have a licensing officer, we have a designing out crime officer who assists with crime prevention, potentially dealing with repeat burglary victims and trying to ensure that that's not going to happen again and the best prevention is put in place to ensure that. We've got our custody team who are obviously very busy dealing with everyone that we bring and process through custody, looking after them, managing their rights and also ensuring that the process runs nice and smoothly. We've got a roads policing team that are out policing the roads of the county, not just the strategic roads but also all the roads within our borough. We've got dogs and armed response unit who obviously cover the whole of Surrey but support us on our borough as well. And we have 2 other specialist teams, the domestic abuse team and child abuse team. And as the Chief Constable has already mentioned, the importance of getting those investigations right first time and building the trust of those victims and moving those investigations forward. Wanted to go through some of what we have done throughout 2023 as a local team. We've had some really good successes. We had an animal welfare investigation, which has been quite long-winded. We completed a warrant back in April 2021, and in September this year, 2 people have actually been sentenced. 20 dogs were seized as part of this warrant, and our rural crime officer described the kennels as the worst as she'd ever been to in her policing career. And the investigation established that their basic diet for the dogs had been McDonald's. Both offenders were sentenced to suspended prison sentences and unpaid work, but were also ordered to pay £5,000 compensation each, and also disqualified from owning or controlling dogs or horses for 10 years. We also have been working really hard in terms of keyless vehicle theft. It's an offence which is affecting Tandridge, it's affecting Surrey, and it's a national issue. Keyless vehicles are vulnerable. However, this time last year, I'm sad to say that Tandridge had the highest rates of keyless vehicle theft in the whole of Surrey. We've had a lot of targeted activity and relentless pursuit of our offenders, resulting in many arrests, many charges, and many people being currently remanded in court awaiting sentencing. Our theft of motor vehicle has reduced by 43% year on year. These offences are still continuing, and I would urge people with keyless vehicles to ensure they utilise prevention methods such as Faraday bags. There are links on our website to all the different prevention methods you can use to protect your keyless vehicles. I know one incident that has definitely sparked the interest of the local community, and understandably so, was the stabbing of a young person in Oxted. I'm pleased to say that there was quite a swift arrest of a 16-year-old male. The stabbing happened in October, and he was sentenced in December to 2 years youth detention after pleading guilty. We have also had a lot of successes in terms of burglary arrests. Our residential burglary rates in Tandridge are down 17% year on year. In December, we arrested and charged a male for 4 burglaries in Lingfield and Woldingham, and he's been charged and remanded in prison. We also identified 2 Chilean males who were part of what's been described as a tourist burglary cell, who were linked to 2 burglaries in Oxted. They have also been charged and remanded in prison. One of the local team worked really hard in relation to the arrest and sentencing of a church burglar. He burgled churches across the whole of the South East, but in September he was charged with multiple offences, including churches in Oxted and Tadworth. The local team and the Antisocial behaviour specialist worked alongside his conviction and were successful in applying for a criminal behaviour order. So when he is released from prison, he has an order preventing him from entering any religious establishment in England and Wales for a lifetime. Alongside this, we've been working really hard with our partners and local housing providers in terms of antisocial behaviour in the area. We've been utilising our antisocial behaviour powers through the courts where chronic complex issues have been identified and initial prevention work and warnings haven't worked. We've had full and partial closure orders, which is where the court can impose a closure on a property, stopping people from being able to enter it for a period of 3 months. A partial closure order can prevent other people other than named occupants from being allowed within that property, sometimes safeguarding them from people who are using their property when they shouldn't be. We've utilised these powers in Hurst Green, Oxted and Caterham. And as the Chief Constable has rightly said, in terms of our improvement in shoplifting, we've had multiple shoplifting successes across the borough. Only in December did we charge and remand a repeat shoplifter for offences in Oxted. One of them was particularly nasty, where he had assaulted a member of the staff at the store. He wasn't local to the area, but he was a prolific shoplifter from elsewhere in Surrey, and he was identified by the local team. Alongside this, we've been working quite hard in Caterham with repeat shoplifters there. We've had a number of charges, 1 person remanded, and multiple people have had community protection warnings and notices preventing them from entering certain shops within the Caterham area. And we will continue to case build against them, not just criminally, but also using antisocial behaviour legislation moving forward. Moving to what our priorities are throughout 2023 and 2024, my priorities are to continue to improve community engagement across the borough. We do the Meet the Beats in the local area, we do online engagement, and the team work really hard out in the community to be visible and ensure that engagement. We continue to build strong cross-border relationships. Tandridge does border 3 other forces, Kent, Sussex and Met Police. Criminals don't stop at our borders. We need to work really closely with our partners. I regularly meet with teams in the other forces to ensure that we're sharing intelligence and we know what crime patterns are happening and we're targeting the same people. I'd like to maintain the reduction in burglaries that we've had across the borough. I want to continue to tackle serious acquisitive crime, such as our keyless vehicle offences, and continue to bring offenders to justice. We do need to improve our domestic abuse performance and increase charges and arrests of offenders who are causing harm in our community. And we will do this by continuing to use problem solving to tackle the most chronic and complex issues in the borough.
Thank you very much, Borough Commander, an incredibly comprehensive update. I've got some questions coming in on both Facebook and YouTube, which I'll put to you in a moment. If you do have any further questions, please do put them in the comments section, either on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. We have about 25 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go first. The first question is from Tanya on Facebook, and she asks a question, actually something, Lindsay, that you've just briefly talked about. She says, what are you doing about youths and knife crime and the victims left to suffer? Now, you talked about the stabbing that was in October in Oxted and the 16-year-old male who has already been sentenced last month. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more around that issue. Now, of course, we are lucky. Surrey is the third safest county in the country when it comes to knife crime. There's a huge amount of prevention work going on, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, particularly with those borders that you've just outlined.
No, absolutely not. There are a number of things that go on. Obviously, our youth engagement officers are absolutely key, and working with partners is key. So working with the schools and our youth services. So we actually have regular meetings with them, which are prevention meetings, so we can look at who is of concern in the schools, who could we do any sort of prevention work with, anyone that we have any sort of intelligence that may be carrying knives that we haven't necessarily got evidence to support. We will go and visit them. The youth engagement officers will go out there and issue a knife intervention programme with them. So we will go and try and put that early intervention in place. Obviously, we do more proactive elements as well, where we work with British Transport Police at stations. We will be out and about. We will utilise our stop search powers. On the back of the Oxted stabbing, I put a dispersal order in place so that we could actually disperse groups. And I also put a Section 60 search power in place as well to make sure that actually we could make sure that we had the powers there and could search people and ensure that we were picking up anyone of concern in relation to knife crime.
Right, thank you. Chief Constable, I wonder if you could talk about knife crime a little bit more widely, but also specifically to Tanya's point about victims, of course, and how we support victims within the force.
Thank you. So it's such an important question, and earlier today I and the PCC and a number of senior colleagues from across Surrey were thinking about how it is that we'll discharge the statutory serious violence duty, which imposes rightly on us the obligation to work together to reduce serious violence, of which knife crime is, of course, a depressingly notable feature. And what I hope Surrey will do is learn from the best performing areas in the country where partners share data about people who may well be at risk of violence or may pose a risk of violence themselves. And there are a number of things in the so-called public health approach which enable us to identify people who may present or be at a greater risk, and then depending on what stage they're at, we can decide how best either to help or target them to make sure that they don't present a risk anymore. And there's lots of evidence as to how we can go about that and do that rather better. Very often we find that where knife crime is concerned, it relates to the supply of drugs, particularly in relation to county lines, which is the phenomenon where gangs, often based in major cities, distribute drugs out of those cities into county towns and villages using mobile technology as a means of aiding that distribution and often corrupting young people to deal on their behalf. One of the things that which we in Surrey work to do is to cooperate with the Metropolitan Police to identify the heads of those gangs and networks in order to deal with them as robustly as we possibly can and make sure that we're supporting the people who they would otherwise corrupt and exploit and seek to engage in serious crime on their behalf. Where mercifully someone doesn't lose their life as a result of knife crime, but nevertheless survives with their injuries, the victim care is of course absolutely vital, because the evidence of that person is crucial to understanding the motive for the attack and protecting them thereafter. And officers are extremely well trained in making sure that we're protecting that victim and other potential victims now and in the longer term. It's very important that when someone's a victim of this sort of crime, that it is reported either by the victim themselves, another witness, a friend, or very often by the hospital where they seek treatment.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Andrew. Andrew's contacted us on YouTube, and he's asking about road safety, something that's really important. We have an awful lot of road users in Surrey who aren't necessarily from Surrey, they're not necessarily our residents, but they pass through our county. And he asks, what is being done to increase the safety of vulnerable road users? Personal experience of the online reporting system often doesn't result in any action. If anything is done, it's most likely just a letter. Now, of course, vulnerable road users, that could be cyclists, it can be pedestrians, it could be those perhaps who are suffering from a disability, or even those on horseback, which we also have a lot of in Surrey. More generally, Chief Constable, is there anything that you can comment on in terms of?
Yes, well, I think it's important to link this to Lindsay's compelling points about keyless vehicle theft, because it's criminals and their use of the roads which often presents the greatest risk. And whilst I don't pretend that there aren't people who pose a risk on the road, whether due to intoxication, speed, or some other such phenomenon, who aren't necessarily criminals who pose a risk, we have to think about where we most keenly target our resources. And that's why I'm very keen that we use our powers to understand and target criminals who often drive extremely recklessly and dangerously in the course of carrying out their crimes, which is why we want to prevent those crimes and then bear down very heavily on them when they do happen. We do also have a specialist team of officers who look at the fatal 5 characteristics which most predict whether someone is likely to have an accident, and by looking at particular hotspots and prevention initiatives, try and ensure that we change driver behaviour and keep people safe. But Lindsay might have some observations about Tandridge in particular.
No, obviously we've got casualty reduction officers that work within our area, and they assist with some of the speed enforcement on some of the priority roads that are identified through collision data, but also through residents' concerns in those areas and speed surveys that are done in conjunction with the County Council. Alongside that, the Vanguard team that you've mentioned that are out, they're targeting people that we have intelligence on and people that are using our roads who are potentially under the influence of drugs, drink, that side of things as well. And I know they've had some really good successes recently.
Good. What about, Chief Constable, that reporting mechanism that Andrew talks about? I'm not sure if there's anything in particular that you want to comment on that. Perhaps the team could come back. It's quite a technical question. Maybe get the team to come back and answer that.
Yes, it is a technical question, and of course there are different means of reporting to us, and some are more effective than others. What I would encourage you to do, whilst we address that particular technical point that you've asked, is still to report. Because very often people, whether it's a crime or a traffic matter, think there's no useful purpose in reporting, and understandably they're ignorant of how critical that one bit of information might be. That report might relate to a disqualified driver, it might relate to someone who habitually drives dangerously, it might relate to someone who's part of an organised crime group, and could be a critical piece of intelligence, not only in respect of someone's driving behaviour, but their criminal behaviour.
Right, thank you very much. The next question is from Liz, who is also watching us on YouTube. Hi Liz. Liz asks, you've actually addressed a bit of this already, Lindsay, but Liz asks, can you please answer what you're doing, if anything, on crime as a whole in Caterham and Whiteleaf area, as you seem to be only concerned with high-value car crime and drug crime? Rather than just telling residents to handle it themselves or find their own solutions to minor issues like antisocial behaviour, vandalism or assault. Now, these are all really important issues. You can talk a bit about that. I'm sure, Chief, you'll want to talk about how antisocial behaviour is anything but minor. But Lindsay first.
I don't know whether this relates to something recently, but we have had a series of criminal damages in Caterham recently, and we have identified someone in relation to that who has been arrested and has current bail conditions in relation to the keying of vehicles in the Caterham area, and that has been dealt with by the local team and is currently under investigation, and we're linking in with those that we can evidentially link. I appreciate there's probably more offences, but we have to deal with the ones that we can evidentially link to the person, and that is progressing currently. And actually in Whiteleaf we have joint operations planned with the British Transport Police in the area on Friday nights in relation to reported antisocial behaviour in the area, planned for the next few weeks. So we are very much targeting the other areas, and all I can say is if you're having antisocial behaviour and things like that, like we said before, the importance of reporting it so we know where the issues are. We get reports from all over the borough. I've got resources, I need to work out where to put them, knowing just because we don't necessarily deploy it instantly at that point, it doesn't mean that it doesn't form part of that bigger puzzle. It might be that we're going to plan with partners like another force like British Transport Police to come back and actually really target that issue. So please do keep reporting to us.
Thank you. Chief Constable, do you want to talk a bit about it's not a minor crime, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. It's a collection of crimes which can be and often are very serious, notably criminal damage or harassment, theft, drug supply. Often people talk about antisocial behaviour as though it's somehow more minor, and I don't suggest that Liz, I think it was who posed the question, would say so for a moment. It's very important that, as Lindsay has done in this particular case, that we first and foremost deal with the crime which is alleged or disclosed, and then look at how it is that we can solve the problem more generally, whether that relates to changing the behaviour of the people involved, better prevention, designing out the crime with the local council. But the police must get on and deal with that which only we can do, and that means taking the report, trying to identify the offender and dealing with them appropriately and robustly. We do have a plan to identify the most persistent problems of antisocial behaviour across the force and ensure that we can be held to account for addressing those. So hopefully we'll be able to report positive news of that over the months and years ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Another one for you, Borough Commander. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the antisocial behaviour that's been happening in Godstone, and if you've got any update.
So this actually went to the neighbourhood policing team. They were investigating a particular property that had had repeat, I mean, some people would call it the old knockdown ginger, but actually it wasn't. It was really affecting the resident and actually resulted in some damage to her door as well. The officer who was investigating that did manage to identify some of the young people and has been round and spoken with their families and the parents of those young people to try and target it from the root side of things rather than going down the criminal route in this case. So we will continue the patrols. The local PCSOs are out in the area and everything else as well. So we are well aware of the issues down there and have got people out and about trying to target it.
Excellent, thank you. Burglary, we know that we're at that time of year where we do see burglaries rise. We see them rise once it starts to get darker in the evenings, and then particularly from November through December and January. And residents are understandably concerned about burglary. I wonder if you could talk, actually I'm going to ask both of you to talk. Lindsay, if you could talk a little bit about the work that's been happening, and I know there's particularly a lot happening around Lingfield and Woldingham. And Chief Constable, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about burglary more generally and how we're tackling it in the county.
So I've obviously already mentioned the work I do with the neighbouring forces, but actually that's really important to know what offenders we've got just over the border, what patterns of offending they've got in other areas, so that ensure that when we're doing proactive patrols, we sometimes do it in partnership with our neighbouring forces, obviously with the Met Police. So we're out at our peak times targeting the specific modus operandi that they're using to get into properties, especially in Woldingham, Limpsfield, Oxted, some of our more high value properties. We are seeing people come across rear gardens and across fields, so ensuring that prevention advice is shared with the local community, ensuring doors are locked, that sort of thing, and there's not bins right outside your house that enable people to climb up. That side of things. The local team have also been out at different Meet the Beats offering prevention advice in the local area as well. So we try and do both sides of it, the prevention side and the proactive targeting.
Brilliant, thank you. Chief Constable, there's been a lot about burglary, hasn't there, in the last year or two in the press, and I know that it's something that the government has been really pushing police forces across the country to tackle. Could you talk a little bit about Surrey more widely?
Certainly. So rates of burglary have, thankfully, over a number of years been reducing, and there's a number of reasons for that. The nature of property, which is attractive to thieves how easily that property is to dispose of, the presence of other evidence such as doorbell footage, and the greater likelihood that people since and post the pandemic will be working at home means that burglary rates have fallen. But that is no consolation to those who are still victims. It's a deeply unsettling crime for victims and their families, an extremely serious crime, and therefore whilst it's lower than it might have been in the past, we certainly should and don't take it any less seriously. And that means I can reassure you, intending burglary and not only inquiring of the victim as to what lines of inquiry there might be, but thinking ourselves as to what lines of inquiry there might be in respect of doorbell footage, house-to-house inquiries which could reveal suspicious activity or witnesses, forensic evidence obviously, and also the use of things like automatic number plate recognition which might reveal the access or egress of offending vehicles. It's so important that burglary is reported. It generally is in comparison with other crimes, and rest assured that if we don't get them for your burglary, there's a very good likelihood that we'll get them for another one, and it might be that we can at least identify the offender for your crime whilst they're sent to prison for something else. So do please report it, do please rest assured that it is taken extremely seriously. We want to drive it down even lower and also improve again our rate of catching burglars.
Excellent, thank you. I've had a question in from Tracy about shoplifting, and Lindsay, shoplifting is something we spend a lot of time, I know, talking about, and we've spent time down in Oxted as well with businesses down there, and you've been doing a huge amount of work on it. Tracy says there are a number of regular shoplifters known to shop owners and workers. Not only are they shoplifting, but they also threaten staff. What is being done to identify them and to take action against them?
So we are working really closely at the moment. Most recently, we've been doing targeted work down in Oxted, liaising with all the shops. We have literally been shop to shop on both sides, Station Road East and West, speaking to all the shops, encouraging reporting, because I have no doubt that this is happening in a number of stores, but a number of stores are not reporting this to police, and our crime figures don't suggest that it is as big an issue as I very much believe it actually is. We really need that reporting. I've had some great successes up in catering where we're getting really good reporting, we're identifying people and we're putting them before the courts, and we're also using additional powers under the antisocial behaviour legislation. We need other stores to follow suit. So we will be out and about in the towns. We've been doing plainclothes operations and high visibility policing, so sometimes people won't necessarily know we're out. Pre-Christmas we did at least 2. We've done 1 in January already, and we've got more planned. So we are definitely out and about, and we've already had the successes that I've already mentioned. So we're definitely moving the right way, but we definitely need the increased reporting of it through the reporting mechanisms.
Thank you. Chief Constable, this is a good chance to ask you about something that comes up quite a lot, which is actually about reporting. We've had conversations ourselves and also in community meetings where sometimes people have been a bit worried about reporting something. They don't want to bother the police, they don't want to dial 999. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that importance of reporting, how people should do it, what's the best way to do it, the options in Surrey, and what they can expect at the other end.
Yes, it's a very good and important point. So the options in Surrey are good for reporting, actually, considerably more advanced than elsewhere. Of course, if a crime is in progress, then the chances of our responding quick enough, both to protect the person who is at risk and to apprehend the offender, are increased if someone dials 999. So please, if you're in any doubt, don't be at all concerned about doing that. You can contact us through various digital and social media channels, and I've been only recently in our contact centre and met some very able, recently recruited but highly trained young staff who are determinedly monitoring those channels and dealing in just the same way as one would expect to be dealt with if you made a telephone call. And of course there's our non-emergency number 101 as well. His Majesty's Inspectorate rightly identified concerns in respect of the quality and speed of some of our initial call handling. Please rest assured we'd already identified those ourselves, and now performance is improving quite dramatically in those respects. But crime reporting is really important. This is why we're focusing on this issue of trust, because we need you to trust us with the information that you've seen, because without that information we can't ultimately act on it and protect you. And the public can't be expected to be privy to all of the things that the police know, and often you won't appreciate just how critical the one piece of information you have might be. So it's far better to report it than not, and then our staff and officers can use their own good judgment as to the type of response it needs. But please do report anything which you don't think is right.
Thank you very much. If you do have any burning questions, please do get them in now before we finish, and I will try to get to as many as possible. Tandridge is obviously quite a rural county, as you've already said, particularly where we border with Kent and down with Sussex. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because it's one of the things that communities in Surrey, and particularly in Tandridge, and we've also just had Mole Valley earlier, often raise, which is they don't necessarily feel that they get the level of visibility or any of that. Could you talk a little bit about how you police the rural areas in Tandridge?
So I have a dedicated rural PCSO who's Kerry Furlong. She's very well known in the rural community, farmers, gamekeepers, all linked in with her. She monitors a rural crime WhatsApp group to ensure information is shared between the rural community, and also runs yearly meetings with the farmers and gamekeepers. Any rural crimes that are committed, albeit sometimes because of the rural nature, we do sometimes struggle with positive lines of inquiry. When we talk about CCTV and that side of things, when you're talking about really rural areas, we do sometimes struggle, but she ensures that she goes back and offers any sort of crime prevention and everything else. We've actually got a second rural PCSO working with us at the moment, supporting her, and often they crew up together with my team, with the PCs, and go out on later shifts. And I think it was only in December that we managed to stop 2 people for poaching offences. They are currently on bail just whilst the gun that they're with is away for testing as to whether or not we have any additional charges, but they will be being charged for the poaching offences, which has been shared with the community already.
Thank you. Chief Constable, I wonder if you could speak to our rural communities for a moment, and I know that it's something you've taken a real interest in, both in Surrey and in your previous role.
Yes, and I'm determined that we do better in this respect. Hopefully I can reassure people that I really do understand the absolute critical role of our rural economy as custodians of our countryside, and also the supply of the security of our food supply. It's such an important part of the national and local infrastructure, and it's absolutely critical, therefore, that we provide you with protection. I understand entirely just how difficult it must be if a vital piece of equipment or a chemical or a sat-nav is stolen on a critical day or time in the seasonal cycle, and what that can mean for a business and how terrifying it must be. And also we know crimes such as hair coursing can involve organised crime groups and some very serious high stakes criminal money involved. So we need to bear down on this sort of behaviour. There's a lot that we can do without realistically expecting extra resources, whether in respect of prevention, identifying the areas most at risk, the sorts of communication to which Lindsay refers, higher visibility policing operations, which will certainly feature rural crime in the next year, and many other things where I can take some experience from previous forces and national experts, and hopefully earn even greater confidence from the rural community, but really show some operational policing potency in bringing people to justice as well.
Excellent, thank you very much, and I hope that does go some way to reassuring our rural communities. There's one more question on Facebook, I understand, which is just winging its way over to me now, but before I go to that, I've got a question for you about, with both of you actually, about how closely the force works with British Transport Police. Now, you've talked a bit about this, Lindsay, in relation to it, but of course we border with the Metropolitan Police, which has the largest BTP sort of contingent with it around London, and we have an awful lot of commuters, an awful lot of people using trains in the county. Could you talk briefly about the work that you do with BTP in Tandridge, and then I wonder, Chief Constable, if you could talk a bit. Again, it comes back to how important that partnership working is.
So we're linked in with the local teams for British Transport Police that cover all our stations on our area, linked in sharing information, running joint operations, that side of things, and obviously they have access to the wider network of intelligence of issues that they've got going on across the borders as well. So we very much locally do work quite closely with British Transport Police.
Yes, we routinely share intelligence. There's a lot of transport hubs across Surrey, and whether in respect of combating organised crime groups, county lines who I mentioned earlier who might use the transport network, or policing major events such as protests, local police forces such as Surrey are well accustomed to operating in partnership with British Transport Police.
Thank you. I've got one more question which has come in, as I said, on Facebook, which I think you've probably covered it, but I do want to give you an opportunity to say a bit more just in case there is any more. And it's about taking antisocial behaviour seriously and the amount of stress that it can cause. We've got a family here, a woman here whose son was discriminated by somebody who is known to the police, but the police are struggling to take action on it. And that issue about how antisocial behaviour can turn into a bigger crime, which is true, and we've seen it. It is a real challenge, isn't it? I just want to give you the opportunity, Chief Constable, and Lindsay, if you want to come in on dealing, and the challenges sometimes with dealing with antisocial behaviour, again, going back to that point about evidence.
Yes, I understand from personal experience the effect which antisocial behaviour can have on people and their families, and it's why I don't pretend that we are in any respect perfect in our response, but I want to be very clear that very often antisocial behaviour features substantive criminal offences which themselves need to be investigated and, where appropriate, charged and prosecuted, or at the very least the offender identified and dealt with appropriately. There are lots of other things that we can do outside of the criminal justice system. As I said at the start of my small talk, Surrey is well practiced in the prevention and the problem solving that we need to do, and all of the things that we need to consider, whether it's the behaviour of a particular family, the provision for young people, the involvement of schools, the problem of drugs, and the various things which might somehow motivate or encourage antisocial behaviour. But please do report it, and if you don't think that you're getting the sort of response I'm describing, then you must make that known very clearly.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think there is much to add. Obviously, it does sound like it's around a specific case.
Yes.
So I would say if you've got concerns, go back to your investigating officer and raise those. It might be that evidential thresholds are not being met, but it doesn't mean we can't then look at what other options we have under antisocial behaviour legislation and that side of things, which, although won't necessarily be a criminal conviction, there are other options out there that we can consider and look at as to another way of dealing with it.
Thank you. And a final question from Andy on Facebook. Are there any further Meet the Beat sessions planned?
I think the next one is in Dorman's Land and it's just about to be advertised. Conrad, the PCSO down there, is just about to put it out.
Excellent.
So that's the next one, and there will be more to come.
And that will be advertised on the Facebook?
It will be on Facebook. It's normally shared with the local parish council, that side of things. So
brilliant.
Yeah, Conrad is in the process of setting that up as we speak.
Fantastic. So Andy, look out for that on all the usual channels. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Borough Commander Lindsay Watley. Thank you to Tim de Meyer, our Chief Constable. Thank you to Susan for excellently signing our way through that. Thank you so much for joining. Have a lovely and safe evening. Goodbye.